Hello everyone, I'm Rebecca Keppel. In today's video, I am starting a brand new series that's called Get a Jump on Christmas. Normally, I am one who really struggles getting a jump on Christmas and even thinking about the holidays this early. But then when it comes down to it, the holidays are such a rush and I end up so stressed out. So I decided there's one thing I could do that would take some of the stress of the holidays off at that time, and that's getting my Christmas cards done early. Now I know a lot of you probably already do this, so I'm going to play along with you and work on some Christmas cards for the next few months. Waffle Flower is a company that has a bunch of new holiday products available right now so that you can get started on this year's holiday cards. So today I am going to focus on using some of their brand new stencils and holiday stamps and dies. Here are two of the stencils that I'm going to focus on today. This is the big Dots Stencil, and I don't know if you can see it in camera, but there are lines drawn for circles next to the openings. That means you can either use the stencil once and create one set of dots, or you can use it twice and create a whole row of dots. Now you could use the same color or different colors. You could use the same medium or two different mediums, and I'm going to show you all of those ideas in this video today. So the other stencil that I want to focus on today is called the Foam Squares Stencil, and it's very similar in that the openings next to them have drawn squares so that once you ink blend or place one down, you can work on another row in another color or medium. I'm using Neenah Solar White cardstock today, and I'm working on my Waffle Flower water media mat. I'm going to use some Pixie Spray behind the stencil to hold it in place. Make sure that Pixie Spray is dry before you put it down so it doesn't tear your paper when you pull it up. I'm going to be using Distress Oxide inks for my ink blending today, and I started with Lucky Clover. And while the stencil is still in place, I'm just using a towel to wipe away the ink on top. This way I don't have to go wash it every single time. Just gonna wipe it away, and then you could use this just as is, cute little green dots for your background. Or you can place the stencil down again using the lines that are on the stencil to cover up the circles that you already blended, and then you have the openings next to those green circles. This time I'm using Festive berries to color in little red dots next to the green dots, and I was able to shift the stencil over to get a complete coverage on this large 6x6 panel. I'm going to use the same ink blending technique with the Duotone Square Stencil. So a little Pixie Spray sprayed on the back and then placed over a 6x6 piece of white cardstock, and then just press down so that the pressure helps the Pixie Spray keep it in place. This time I'm using Distress Oxide Salvaged Patina, and I'm going to wipe away that excess once again. I'm going to use the squares that are drawn on the stencil to show exactly where to replace it so that I have open places in the other areas. And this time I'm using Distress Oxide Kitsch Flamingo because sometimes it's fun to use colors that are a little brighter and a little bit different than the customary red and green. But I'm going to go back to red and green for this next technique, which is starting with ink blending. I'm going to blend the circles and then wipe away that excess. I'm working on an A2 piece of the white cardstock this time. So I'm going to place my stencil down, covering up those ink blended circles. And this time I'm using Gina K's Glitz Glitter Gel. I'm going to stir it up with a Tonic Studios spatula and then place a bunch of it on the Thermoweb stencil pal. And the reason I like using the stencil pal is because it basically fits a 5.5 or 6x6 piece of paper or stencil, and you don't have to keep using a palette knife that doesn't stretch across your whole project. So just put it at an angle there and then just swipe it downward or side to side depending on the direction of your stencil. This is just circles, so you can go either way, and you want to cover up all the open areas there. So you want to make sure you have enough glitz that you're going to cover all of your circles, but not so much glitz that it's so thick that it's going to take forever to dry. And the glitz really does depend on your climate and how thick of an application you use. I use a pretty thin application here. You can see all that glitter and shine, but it dries relatively quickly. So I absolutely love this better than loose glitter for sure. A lot easier to get a whole pretty glitter background. So I'm going to do something similar, but this time I'm going to work on some party pink cardstock from the stamp market. And I am using Salvaged Patina on top, and I love how the Distress Oxide sits on top of the paper. You can see a hint of the pink coming through, but you also get that really pretty blue from the Salvaged Patina on top. I'm going to lift up the stencil and then move it so that the square lines that are drawn on the stencil cover up the blue squares that I ink blended. And this time I'm using Glitz Glitter Gel in silver because I thought, again, some of those fun colors, the pinks and blues and silvers, can be really great holiday cards as well, not just red and green. And I like to use some of those brights as well. You know how much I love brights in card making anyway. So I'm going to lift up that, and you have now 3 colors because you have the cardstock color, the ink color, and the glitz color. For this one, I am working on an A2 piece of Distress watercolor cardstock, and I'm going to use the Big Dots Stencil again, and I still have some Pixie Spray on the back. I've not had to double spray it yet. This time I'm using brush markers. These are the Karin Brush Marker Pros, and you know that I absolutely love these. I'll link to the video that I use them in first down in the YouTube description box below the video. I am just using a tiny bit of water that I have in the Waffle Flower Water Media Matte palette to the right hand side. So you can see those little squares, they're like little wells, and I put a little bit of water in there for each of the different colors that I'm going to be using. And these brush markers are absolutely brilliant. They're my favorite watercolor markers because I love the vibrant colors and I find them very easy to blend out. I think they are really smooth. I love the bright opaque colors that you can get, but also the pretty wash of watercolor look that you can get by blending it out with just a tiny bit of water. You can see that the paintbrushes that I'm using are pretty thin and small, so I'm really not getting a ton of water on there because I don't want the water to really leak underneath the stencil. I did have a couple of spots where that happened, but for the most part I was able to use just a tiny bit of water and contain that color inside the circle of the stencil. So when you lift it up, check out this. It's so much fun, those bright colors again, and this reminds me of kind of holiday bulbs or Christmas lights and dots on this card background here. So the last way that I'm going to use the stencil is again to use the Big Dots Stencil. This time I'm using Deco Foil Transfer Gel Duo. The reason it's called Duo is because you can use it to apply foil with either pressure or heat. And I'm going to use heat this time, but you can absolutely run it through your die cut machine as well. The only thing is, if you have a little dimension here, your die cut machine is going to press it down a little bit. So it will spread a tiny bit when it's pressed down. So that's why I'm going to use a laminator this time. So I am just making sure that all of those open spaces are covered up, and then I peel off the stencil. You got to wash this stencil right away because this is like an adhesive. And once it's clear, it dries clear, then I'm ready to use my foil. So I am using a collaboration between Thermoweb and the maker Forte, and it is this really beautiful silver holographic cardstock. I'm going to cut it down just a slightly bit larger than the cardstock itself, and I have the color or the pattern facing up towards me and the silver side facing down towards the adhesive. I put it in a parchment paper sandwich that just keeps everything from getting gummed up in your laminator. Make sure your laminator is real hot, like it's been heating up for 10, 15, even 20 minutes. And then once it cools, you can peel off the foil to reveal that it has been adhered down to those dots that we created. So it was still a little sticky on one part because it was still a little warm. So you want to make sure that it's nice and cool, and then just go ahead and peel off that top layer and you've got your dots on your red cardstock. This is Cherry Kisses from the stamp market. So I absolutely love this holographic silver on that red cardstock as a background as well. Now it's time to turn those backgrounds into cards. So I'm going to start with some polished foil paper from Memory Box, and I've got to cut that down to an A2 piece of foil cardstock, that blue in the back. I'm using my Memory Runner XL to adhere the watercolor dots that we created down to that foil background. Now the foil background's pretty thin, so I don't tend to cut out the center center of these like I would with other thicker cardstocks, but I love the way it looks around the edge. That shine is just absolutely fabulous. This new stamp set from Waffle Flower is called the Wonderful Christmas Combo. I love the mix of script and straight fonts. It's a lot of fun, and the sentiments are really just sweet and unique, and I like them a lot. So this one in particular says, "All is calm, all is bright," and I thought that was perfect for those bright, they look like lights on the watercolor background. So I did stamp it in Distress Oxide ink, so I had to double or triple stamp it, and then I cut it out, and I'm using some Thermoweb 3D foam squares to pop it up because there are parts of the sentiment that are thick enough to hide foam squares behind. So sometimes that's just the easiest way to finish off a card, is popping up that sentiment. And that's why I love Waffle Flower's sentiment stamp sets always have coordinating dies that you can get with them so that you can get some dimension out of your sentiments. That's all I'm going to do there. I did use a sand eraser. There was a little bit of the adhesive that had gotten out under the stencil, so I just used the sand eraser to erase it right off, and then I cut that down to 4 by 5 1/4 so that I could mat it on some of the green foil paper from the Memory Box pad. Again, I'm using that Memory Runner XL to adhere it. It's just my favorite tape runner. I am going to stamp and heat emboss on that foil paper, so let's just see how this turns out. I used my anti-static for sure. Then I used the Tonic Studio Sweet Brush to get the excess powder away, and now I'm using the Stamp Market's Emboss ink, and I'm going to ink up the sentiment. This is from that same Waffle Flower stamp set. It says, "Deck the halls with boughs of holly," and I thought that was perfect for some of those green and red cards. So I did pour some Hero Arts white embossing powder on top, and you can see that the anti-static powder really did work, and I was able to heat emboss it. Just make sure you really heat up your heat tool so that it doesn't scorch this thinner paper. And I'm going to use some purple tape to hold those dies in place so I can cut them out and have my whole sentiment again popped up. Like I said, I really like that ability with this stamp set to be able to pop up the sentiment right in the center of this foiled card, and then I'm adding some of the Waffle Flower Clearly Enough enamel dots all around it just for an extra bit of shine and dimension. For this ink blended design, I decided to go with a horizontal format, so I am cutting this down to 5 1/4 by 4 so that it will be a horizontal, because I had a sentiment that I liked and I wanted it to stretch across it. So I'm using some tape runner to adhere it down to another piece of that brushed foil cardstock. And you can see that I did try to stamp the sentiment right on that ink blended background. I felt like it was kind of washed away. I liked it, but I felt like you couldn't really read it. And it says, "It's the most wonderful time of the year." And so I thought that was so pretty. So I'm going to use some of that Stamp Market Pink Party cardstock again. And I stamped and heat embossed with silver on that. And that I felt like it really stands out better. And so I cut that out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop it up once again, and I'm going to layer it right over the one that I stamped on the card. So you'll never really see it, but it just covered that up. And I feel like that stands out a lot more. And I love these two colors together. And for the holidays, I think they're a fun, unique twist on colorful combinations. So here it is again, those same colors, and this time I'm using It's a Wonderful Life, that sentiment from the stamp set, and It's a Wonderful Life happens to be my absolute favorite holiday movie, even though it makes me cry within the first 30 seconds of the movie. So this time I am using the Ultra Bond adhesive. It's a liquid adhesive, comes in a pen form if you like the pen form, which I really do. I find it very handy. Just make sure you hit those corners with a little bit of adhesive and then not a ton everywhere else. You don't want a lot of goop there. A little bit less is more in this sense. And then I ended up popping up that sentiment again. I think this one might be my favorite. So now we're going to work with the red and green dots where the red dots are the glitz. So I thought it'd be cool to put it on a red glitter background. So this glitter paper is also from Memory Box. It's another pad that I have. And I'm gonna put the sentiment on some of the J.J. Bolton's Christmas Stripes, which is one of my favorite pattern papers. And this is by Waffle Flower as well. I love these pads because they are actually 8.5 by 5.5. So you get 2 A2s in one sheet of paper, which is really nice. So there's less waste. So I stamped and heat embossed with white embossing powder. It says, "We wish you a Merry Christmas." I'm going to use the dies to cut it out once again. This time I did layer 2 white cardstock pieces of the dies for the sentiment, and then I'm going to lay the top one right on top. So it's got 3 layers of paper, and then I'm going to use some liquid adhesive behind it. I just liked the way this one looked like that. It was slightly flatter to the card, but still with a little bit of dimension, and I love those pattern paper stripes behind the sentiment. For the red and green ink blended background, I decided to stamp my sentiment on some vellum. This is Simon Says Stamp Vellum, so you can absolutely heat emboss on it. It is thick enough. You just have to be careful not to warp it, not to hold the heat tool on it for too long. So I did stamp it with the Stamp Market's emboss ink, and I poured some gold embossing powder on top of that. And then, like I said, really heat up your heat tool and heat set it. I left the embossing powder out because I wasn't sure if I was going to need to cover it again, but it turned out great. I love the way that looks on the vellum with the gold. So I'm going to hold the die in place with some purple tape and run it through my die cut machine. Then I cut down the panel to 4 by 5.25 so I could mat it onto some green cardstock, and I'm just going to put a little tape runner behind that vellum with the sentiment because honestly you can't see it from the front. So I really like this tape runner a lot. It is my favorite. I have used it before with vellum with pretty much good success as well, so I definitely recommend checking it out if you're looking for a good tape runner. I hope you enjoyed checking out these new products from Waffle Flower, and I hope that you'll join me throughout this series to get a jump on Christmas. Be sure to subscribe so that you get notified every time I add a new video to this series. As always, I want to thank you so much for spending time with me today. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you again soon. That's okay. We're gonna get it done fast. Fast, fast, fast. Doesn't make any sense. Literally makes no sense. Okay. Be sure to subscribe so that you get notified every time what?